Hello and welcome to Ask Your Academic. Today's session will cover the MSc in Clinical Trials, and we're joined by some of our programme team who are going to do their best to answer any questions you have about the programme. If you've got any questions about accommodation, fees, things like that, I'll pop some useful links into the chat for you to get some information. And we've also got our PG online event coming up on the 3rd of March, and there'll be various sessions running on those elements. We are recording the session, so if you miss anything or want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. And if you think of any questions afterwards, there's an email address on all the programme web pages for you to get in touch with the team, and they're brilliant at getting back to you. So to kick off, would our panel like to introduce themselves? So Susan, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. My name's Susan Lindsay. I'm a lecturer here at the MBLS Graduate School, and I'm the programme lead for the Clinical Trials MSc.
Melissa?
Hi, I'm Melissa Scott and I am the administrator for the MSc Clinical Trials programme.
Perfect. And Susan, you've got a bit of an overview. Would you like to share your screen
Sure.
and answer that?
Can you see that okay?
Yep, that's worked.
Okay, so I thought today I would tell you a little bit about the programme and really tell you about the stakeholders that's involved in it, because these are the people that you're likely to meet if you take part in the programme and decide to take it. So essentially we have what's called a triple helix of stakeholders. So that means that we've taken on board feedback from academics, we've taken feedback from the NHS, and we've taken feedback from the industries. So essentially within the University of Glasgow, we have so many different expert clinical academics and they've helped shape this programme. We also have the Centre of Excellence for Trials Collaboration, which is here in Glasgow, and they're here to try and pioneer new clinical trial methodology and design. They're basically a team of experts that range from clinicians, people that are involved with patient-public involvement, and also a clinical trial manager that's really helped shape the clinical trial management course. We also collaborate with the Glasgow Clinical Trials Unit, and they own one of the courses here in the programme. And basically, they coordinate a large portfolio of clinical studies. We collaborate with the NHS, Greater Glasgow and Clyde, and that's one of the largest health boards in Scotland. It's one of the largest health boards here in the UK. And they play a massive role in clinical trial research, all the way through from feasibility to conducting, all the way really for the entire research process through to planning to dissemination. So they are one of our official collaborators on this programme. Finally, we have our industry partner, IQVIA, and they are been involved in so many of the teaching throughout the programme, so you'll get to know all the staff that work there. And essentially, they undertake global commercial trials and they span over 100 countries in terms of the clinical trials they take part in. So essentially, we've drawn on the expertise of academia, of the NHS, and also industry to ensure that this programme allows you to see all the multifaceted roles of clinical research. So this is what the programme looks like. It's like a classic MSc, it's 180 credits long. In semester one, you'll take part in 60 credits, so that's three 20-credit courses. We start off with the introduction to clinical trial design and types. That's your foundational knowledge, so thinking about how we design a clinical trial, what the various phases are. Then we move into how to conduct and monitor a clinical trial. So that's a little bit more about the nuts and bolts of how do we actually monitor, how do we make sure a trial is progressing properly, what are the various different paperwork and all the different things that we need to ensure that a trial is conducted safely. And then the last course of semester one is the medical ethics and regulations, because at all times we need to make sure that our clinical research is meeting these ethics and regulations. In semester two, which runs from January to April, you take part in another 60 credits. That's three 20-credit courses. The first course is owned by the Glasgow Clinical Trials Unit, which is the role of the CTU, and that will explain to you what a CTU does and how they help support clinical research through to feasibility to close out. We then have the clinical trial management course, which is run in collaboration with the CETC, and you think about the various role of a clinical trial manager and how they are vital to ensure that the trial is run correctly. And then finally, we work on communication and dissemination of clinical trial findings. So that's thinking about how do we communicate our clinical trial research to patients, to the public, and how do we eventually publish that data. Finally, in semester two, you'll take part in a dissertation project, which is 60 credits long, and that will take place between May and August. I thought I'd just take a little minute just to explain about the projects, because a lot of people are really usually quite keen to find out what the projects are. In this programme, we try and bring in both external and internal projects. So the external projects would be a project essentially with one of our external partners. So it could be projects with the NHS or IQVIA or other industries or CROs. Alternatively, you might take part in an internal project. Like I said, we have so many excellent clinical academic researchers who are undertaking clinical research. So you might be with a clinical academic, you might be within a research group, or you could be within the CETC. Ultimately, the project types are diverse because clinical research is diverse. So you could potentially be doing a project that's within regulations, management, ethical, trial timelines, thinking about in silico analysis, or working on a project that's essentially with the public patient engagement part of it. And so essentially, yeah, there's a wide range of projects, and that's to allow you to try and choose one that you have enjoyed learning about in the process of the programme. The list is announced in March, April time, and you start the project May and it ends in August. So that's a kind of whirlwind overview of the programme. I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have related to it.
That's great, Susan. Thanks for sharing that. There's a couple of questions that have been submitted here, and I know there's no typical week as an MSc student, but how often should students expect to be like on campus in class for actual face-to-face teaching?
Yeah, so this is a face-to-face programme, which means that you'll be expected to be in person for the taught sessions. Typically for a 20 credit course, you're talking about 20 in-person face-to-face hours. That usually runs over 6 weeks. The teaching tends to be front-loaded in the first 4 weeks, so you would expect to be in for maybe about 5 to 6 hours per week in those first 4 weeks, and then the second 2 weeks you can devote to the assessment. However, I would say that no 2 weeks are the same. It's not always guaranteed what days that you'll be in doing those hours, but I would say roughly 5 to 6 hours per week is probably standard for 20 credit course.
Great, and I think students I think are often surprised at the difference between a master's and an undergraduate
Yeah,
degree in terms of the self-study that's expected of them. So
yeah.
how much should students be doing out with those teaching hours?
Yep, so again, if we go back to the kind of classic of what a 20 credit course is, 20 hours are face-to-face teaching where you're supported by lectures and tutorials, but there's 180 hours that are expected from the students to be self-directed. So it is quite a lot of hours. You are expected to go away and expand on your own knowledge and maybe take those lectures and read around the topic yourself. So there is quite a lot of self-directed study at master's level that is expected. Yeah,
Yeah, and I suppose the more you put in, the more you're going to get out of it. It's like most things, isn't it?
absolutely. Yeah. Mhm.
And in terms of the teaching location, whereabouts are students primarily taught?
Yep, so students will be on the main campus, Gilmore Hill. However, because we have the collaboration with the NHS, students would sometimes go over to Queen Elizabeth teaching facility out near Govan. There is direct buses that can take them there. We also have site visits, but we obviously arrange all the transport for that, so students get to go to the IQVIA Livingston site. But predominantly you'll be on the Gilmore Hill campus for most of it.
Nice, and you get a little bit of sightseeing while you're here as well.
Yes. Mhm.
You mentioned quite a lot of industry partners there,
Yeah.
so that I'm guessing like there's a lot of opportunities throughout the MSc for students to sort of network in terms of thinking of their future career and things.
Absolutely. I mean, this programme, we have so many different external speakers that will come and speak to you. And there's not just the IQVIA team that come and speak to you, we have other industry partners that come in. So there's lots of opportunity for you to engage with different people and to speak to them after and reach out. So yeah, there's lots of networking opportunities that we try and provide with this programme because of that, because it's like I said at the beginning, there's different aspects of clinical research, not just academic, not just NHS, not just industry. So we really try to have those experts come and teach you. So there's lots of opportunities for you to engage with those people.
Nice. And what about assessments? How are students assessed throughout those different courses?
Yep, so we try and have a variety of different assessments. We try to do what's called real world assessments so that you're likely to do something that you'd more see in the workplace. So it could be things like taking part in a mini protocol. You have to write a mini clinical trial protocol, or it could be creating a public patient engagement plan. We also do things like creating management plans or thinking about the ethics and the regulation in the IRAS form. So we're trying to make the kind of assessments more related to what you would see in the workplace. There is quite a lot of group work that we do as well in this programme, and that's really because in clinical research you have to engage with lots of different stakeholders. Communication is absolutely key in this field, and so we try and embed these kind of group work assessments so that you get used to working with your peers, and that might be working together collaboratively to make a presentation or to create like a timeline or something, and you work as a group to present that. So we're trying to have a mixture of assessments in the programme.
Great. And all those courses are actually linked on our programme webpage as well. So if you want a wee bit more about each of them, you can get that on the website. Somebody asked, is there any opportunities for placements throughout the MSc?
So the only placement opportunity really is in your project. You are going to be working full time. It is very labour intensive. There's quite a lot of hours, as I've said, it's like 200 hours in total per course. So you'll find that you are very busy. The courses run almost systematically one after the other, and in semester two there's a bit of overlap of courses, so there's not an awful lot of free time for you to maybe have an additional placement on top of that, but that's why you get the 12-week project in which you can do your placement then.
Nice. And in terms of careers after the MSc, what sort of jobs could students go into, do you think?
So the clinical trial field is absolutely huge and diverse. So what we try to do with the programme is to give you like an overview of all the various different aspects from it. So thinking about feasibility of the clinical trial all the way to close out. The jobs that are within that, whether it be pharmacovigilance or the role of a sponsor or a CRA, or there's so many different job roles within it, clinical trial management. So you might get to the end and think, okay, I've learned about all of it, but this is what I'm interested in. So I feel that the job opportunities are quite diverse because there's it encompasses so many different careers, really.
Nice. You might actually start then with one idea in mind, and by the end of it, you're onto
Absolutely.
something else.
And I think that's what's good about the programme, because it allows you to get a little taster of all the various different aspects of it. You know, we have sponsors come in, you've got a clinical trial manager maybe come in, the IQVIA team, we've got people in different roles within that industry come and speak to you, you know, whether you want to be maybe a clinical trial monitor. So we try and expose you to the various different job roles in the programme so that you can really get an idea of what you enjoy and where you see yourself going forward.
Nice. And it's another benefit of the industry partners being involved, isn't it? Because what are they doing? Could you do
Yeah.
that? Is that something you'd be interested in?
And
Um,
actually, sorry Naomi, not to interrupt there, but IQVIA as well are going to run a career session for our students this year. So I'm hopeful they'll do that every year, and they're going to just have like a panel of people explain to you what their career progression was like, how they got from their degree to within research. So we try and embed as much exposure to job roles and experience as we can.
Nice. Well, it's really exciting, especially because it is such a new program as well. It's constantly changing, isn't it, and just
Yeah.
evolving. And in terms of preparing for the MSc, is there anything that students can do to really set themselves up for September to get the best head start?
I would say we will give you everything that you need to succeed in the programme. But if you are really interested in just thinking about the whole pathway of clinical research and what's involved in it, the NIRH has this clinical trial roadmap. I could maybe share the link with you. And that's like a schematic that shows you the clinical trial timeline from beginning all the way through to the end, thinking about the different processes that are in place. And it's just if something you're interested in, because we try and cover that kind of pathway in the programme. So you can kind of look at that roadmap on the NIRH website and just make yourself a bit more familiar with the various different processes that are involved in clinical research.
Great. And Melissa, you speak to students all the time. Do you have any advice for them for before they start their studies in September?
I think just not to be so anxious because the team is all really nice. The academic staff are lovely. The admin staff are really helpful. I would say that no question is a silly question. We are more than happy to help anyone with any issue that they're having. And please don't hesitate to reach out if you need some support or some help at any point during your studies. So yeah, I would say don't worry because everyone's really, really nice and it's a really supportive environment to learn in.
Yeah, and take some confidence in the fact that you've applied for a programme and you've got an offer. You wouldn't have got an offer if you weren't capable of doing it.
Yeah.
Good, we've ran through all those questions that have been submitted. One of them that we've not, I don't think, touched on is, do we get access to the lesson material before the class?
Yep, so we try and make lecture slides available 24 hours in advance. And then we also give a kind of outline of every session. So on the Moodle, there'll be a kind of synopsis of what you're expected to learn, and usually what's called intended learning outcomes as well associated with every session. Obviously, we have a lot of external people come in and give us lectures. So if they don't give us the slides in advance, we might not get them. But the plan is to always try and have them available 24 hours in advance. And maybe sometimes there might be some learning activities that you need to engage with prior to the class. That will all be available on the Moodle for you to engage with and take part in. Mhm.
Great. And do you find that the students have set up like their own little groups and things like for on teams and that to just help with their study and support each other? Is that something that you've noticed
Yeah,
yourself?
Like I said, because there's group work embedded in this programme right from the beginning, the very first assessment you'll do is a group work assessment, and that actually helps form excellent bonds with your peers because people then have to do like, some icebreaker activities and they maybe set up these team pages so they can support each other. So yeah, I think you will really benefit from that peer-to-peer interaction and peer learning, and I feel like students really do lean on each other and support each other when it comes to the assessment. So yeah, that does happen quite a lot.
And Melissa, it's maybe worth mentioning there's quite a lot of different support services out there for students, isn't there? Is that something that they would contact yourself for to get more information while they're in when they're starting their course?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm more than happy to speak to anyone that needs any sort of additional support. Normally I provide links to student support services in the welcome letter that you receive when you first start registering. But if you want some more advice or if you have any questions about the support services, then I'm more than happy to help. So we have things like the disability service that can help support students that have additional support needs. We have the student support officer who's there to listen to any sort of wellbeing concerns. And we have the student learning development service that helps with the sort of academic side of things. So yeah, there is a lot of support out there, and I'm happy to advise anyone that needs a bit of extra support.
Great, thank you. That is, we've actually covered everything that we've been asked beforehand, and there's no questions being submitted in the chat. Is there anything, I can't think of anything, is there anything that we've not covered that you think is important to mention or anything you'd like to have more information on?
No, I was just to say, I suppose this programme was brand new for the curriculum last year, so we're still in the running of the first year. So if you choose to come and do the programme, you'll essentially be the second ever cohort that's to take it. So it's a really exciting time, I think, to be involved in the programme. It's an iterative process. You can feed back, you can help, shape what it becomes. And yeah, I think it's a really exciting time even just to be involved in clinical research. And the students this year seem to have really enjoyed it. So far. So yeah, I think feel free to ask us any questions. And like Melissa says, we're a really friendly bunch, and we look forward to supporting you if you decide to come and take the programme.
Yeah. Like I said, the email address for the programme is on the programme webpage, and we'll share that in the recording that we send out as well. So do get in touch, ask any questions, those silly questions, like Melissa said, there's no such thing. But thanks very much, Susan and Melissa, for taking time out of your day. I know how busy you are. It's been really nice to hear about the programme, and if you do have any further questions, please do get in touch, and hopefully we see you all come September time. So thanks very much. Bye bye.
Okay, bye.